Dorian Kim sat behind his massive mahogany desk, his gaze fixed on the latest case files. His office was pristine, sterile even, reflecting the cold precision he had built his career upon. A top-tier lawyer, he had a reputation for being ruthless, never a step behind, always calculating, always in control. The legal world bent to his will, his clients, his adversaries, and even his emotions. Everything had a place, every thought had a purpose. But today, that control was tested. The door to his office creaked open, drawing Dorian's attention. Standing there in the doorway was his new paralegal, a young man in his mid-20s with soft, dark eyes and the kind of nervous energy that was almost tangible. He was dressed modestly in an unassuming black suit, a white shirt, and a tie that was a bit too loose. But it wasn't his appearance that caught Dorian's eye. It was the feeling of familiarity, the sense of something or someone he couldn't place. Mr. Kim, the paralegal's voice was tentative, polite, and soft. "I'm Jae-sok, your new assistant." Dorian took a moment to appraise him, his icy eyes scanning the young man. The way Jae-sok stood there, unsure of himself but eager, set off a strange stir in Dorian's chest. The kid was too young for this kind of work, too wide-eyed to understand the game he was about to get pulled into. "You're late," Dorian said flatly, his tone sharp, dismissive. Jae-sok's expression faltered just for a split second before he straightened. "I'm sorry. I wanted to make a good impression." "Save the apologies," Dorian replied, motioning for him to come closer. "Just do your job." Jae-sok moved to the desk, his movements careful, almost unsure, as he set a stack of files on the corner. Dorian didn't need to look at them. His assistant wasn't here to do his real work, not yet, at least. The files were a formality. His real test was coming, and Dorian didn't know if he was ready for it. The silence between them lingered for a moment, the weight of unspoken tension thick in the air. Dorian studied Jae-sok more intently now, the strange pull between them growing harder to ignore. There was something oddly familiar about him, something in the way he carried himself. But Dorian wasn't one to dwell on intuition. "I understand this is a new environment for you," Dorian finally said, breaking the silence, "but in this office, you follow one rule: do not disturb me unless absolutely necessary." Jae-sok nodded, looking down at his hands. Dorian's eyes flickered to the faint tremor in his assistant's fingers. Despite the professional facade, the kid was hiding something. That much was clear. But what exactly? Dorian's curiosity was piqued, but he shoved it down, refusing to let himself get distracted by the mystery that Jae-sok represented. His focus was on work, nothing else. "Of course, Mr. Kim," Jae-sok murmured, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. He started to turn toward the door, but then, as if it was a last-second thought, he paused. "Actually, there's something I should tell you." Dorian raised an eyebrow, not particularly interested, but the change in Jae-sok's demeanor caught his attention. "What is it?" Jae-sok took a deep breath. I'm the younger brother of your ex. The one you..." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy, and in that moment, Dorian's blood went cold. "I'm aware," he said quickly, his voice freezing over with a chill that could freeze the very air in the room. He wasn't about to let this conversation go any further. "Not here, not now." Jae-sok seemed to shrink under Dorian's cold gaze, and he quickly nodded, swallowing the words that hung on his tongue. "I just thought you should know." Dorian's jaw tightened, but he didn't break his stare. There was no room for sentimentality in his world. No room for old wounds to be reopened. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the polished wood of his desk, his mind racing despite his outward calm. The last thing he needed right now was someone from his past showing up at his door, especially someone connected to the one person who had left him broken, stranded in a sea of memories. "Let's keep this professional," Dorian said sharply, his tone a warning. "I don't need reminders of the past." Jae-seok nodded, his eyes briefly meeting Dorian's before he turned and left the office without another word. As the door clicked shut behind him, Dorian allowed himself a moment of pause. He hadn't expected Jae-seok to drop such a bombshell so casually. The connection to his ex, to the life he'd tried so hard to bury, was too much for him to process in one breath. But he couldn't afford to think about it. Not yet. Not when there was so much work to do. But as Dorian returned his attention to the stack of papers on his desk, he couldn't shake the feeling that Jae-seok was here for more than just a job. There was something about the young man, a certain energy in his presence, that was too sharp, too calculated to be innocent. And Dorian Kim didn't like things he couldn't control. Jae-seok stood at the copy machine, his fingers skimming over the legal briefs with mechanical precision, but his mind wasn't on the task. Not really. His thoughts kept drifting back to Dorian Kim's expression from earlier, how quickly it had shifted from icy indifference to something tighter. Controlled fury. Maybe even panic. He hadn't meant to say it so bluntly. "I'm the younger brother of your ex." He should be waited, maybe let the truth slide in later. But the tension between them had been unbearable. Better to rip the bandage off than let it fester. Still, the cold in Dorian's eyes hadn't just been professional. It had been personal. Behind him, the office murmured with low phone calls and the soft thud of shoes on carpet. Sleek, modern, and so quiet it felt like a library with expensive taste. Jae-seok didn't belong here and he knew it. But that hadn't stopped him from applying. Or from lying on the application. He pressed the print button and exhaled slowly. He wasn't here by coincidence. And Dorian would figure that out eventually. Across the floor, Dorian watched from the window of his office, one hand loosely holding a mug of black coffee gone cold. His stare was locked on the paralegal across the room. Jae-seok worked diligently, shoulders tense but posture calm, like someone used to pretending they were fine. Dorian knew the look too well. He wore it himself every day. He still couldn't decide if hiring Jae-seok had been a cruel joke played by fate or a misstep in his usually flawless instincts. When the resume had landed on his desk, he hadn't made the connection. The name hadn't stood out. He hadn't thought twice. Until he saw those eyes. Eyes he'd seen before. Not in Jae-seok but in his older brother. The one Dorian had spent 2 years with. The one who had left without a single word the moment things got hard. That relationship had gutted him. He'd buried it, locked it down, and built himself into someone colder, sharper, untouchable. And now, here stood Jae-seok. It didn't feel like coincidence. Not with the timing. Not with the way Jae-seok looked at him, not angry, not vengeful, but like he already knew too much. Dorian set the mug down and turned from the glass. Later that evening, the office had mostly emptied out. A few late-night lights glowed in distant corners, but silence had taken over. Jae-seok was still there, eyes strained from reading pages of depositions, when a voice broke the stillness. "Why are you really here?" He turned, startled to see Dorian standing behind him, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened just slightly, though the stern expression hadn't relaxed one bit. Jae-seok blinked, then sat back slowly. You mean, why did I take the job? I mean, why my firm, why me? There was no use lying, not with that tone. Jae-seok looked up at him, voice calm. Because I wanted to know why you left him. Dorian's jaw tightened. That's none of your business. He disappeared after you two broke up, Jae-seok continued, his tone still level. He cut contact with our family. It wasn't just a breakup, it was like watching him vanish. He was never the same again. Dorian didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned against the desk across from Jae-seok and crossed his arms. You think I broke him? I think something happened, Jae-seok said. And no one's telling the truth. A tense pause settled between them. Dorian exhaled sharply through his nose. Your brother left me. I didn't abandon him. He didn't even give me the courtesy of a conversation. I came home one day and everything of his was gone. The words came out colder than he intended. Detached. Practiced. Jae-seok flinched, but recovered quickly. That's not what he told me. Dorian's eyes narrowed. So you're here to what, spy, dig up dirt on me? Jae-seok met his gaze evenly. I'm here to find out the truth. And maybe, he added, a little softer now, to decide who to believe. It was the honesty that caught Dorian off guard. Not the accusation. Not the boldness. But the openness. It was rare. It was dangerous. Dorian pushed off the desk and straightened. Then do your job. And stay out of my personal life. He turned to leave. Jae-seok spoke again, quiet, but certain. You're not the man he described to me. Cold, yes. Harsh. But not a liar. Dorian paused at the door, back still turned. And what makes you so sure? A beat of silence. Then, because liars pretend to care. You don't even bother pretending. And for a moment, just a flicker, Dorian almost smiled. Jae-seok wasn't sleeping well. Each night after leaving the office, he returned to his tiny apartment, more boxes than furniture tossing and turning beneath flickering streetlights. Dorian Kim's voice echoed in his head, clipped, precise, detached. The way he talked about his brother like the relationship had been little more than a business transaction that ended in a bad investment. But Jae-seok could see through the mask now. That tightness in Dorian's voice, the way his eyes clouded over when the past was mentioned, it wasn't detachment. It was damage. And maybe guilt. At work, the silence between them thickened. Dorian no longer spoke unless necessary. He handed off assignments without looking directly at Jae-seok. He returned emails in one-line replies. And yet he always noticed when Jae-seok was in the room. The small things gave him away. A flicker of his eyes when Jae-seok entered. A long pause between thoughts when he spoke and Jae-seok was too close. A subtle tension in his shoulders when their hands brushed over shared documents. Jae-seok felt it too. He hated how aware he was of Dorian, of his presence, his scent, his quiet command of the space. He hated how his stomach twisted when Dorian's voice dropped low in strategy meetings, or how his pulse betrayed him every time Dorian leaned in to whisper instructions. This wasn't what he came for. He had told himself this was about answers. About getting closure for the years of silence his brother had left behind. But now, the lines were blurring. Because somewhere between resentment and curiosity, something else was blooming. One evening, after the others had gone home, Jae-seok lingered at his desk long after his task was complete. He could hear Dorian in his office, still working. He hesitated, then stood. A knock on the door broke the quiet. "Come in," came Dorian's voice low, tired. Jae-seok stepped inside, a thick file clutched in his hands. "Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to drop this off in person." Dorian looked up from his laptop, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, tie loosened again. "You could be emailed it?" "I know," Jae-seok replied. "But I figured you'd ignore it like the last three." That earned the smallest arch of an eyebrow. Jae-seok set the file on the desk, but made no move to leave. The tension between them pulsed in the silence. Not hostile. Not warm. Something in between. Something heavy. Dorian leaned back in his chair. "You're not very good at taking subtle hints, are you?" "I don't think you want me to," Jae-seok said, before he could stop himself. Dorian's expression didn't change, but the air shifted. He stared at Jae-seok, really stared at him this time. "You think this is some kind of game?" he asked, voice quiet but dangerous. "No," Jae-seok replied, steady. "I think you're used to pushing people away before they can do it first." Dorian stood, slowly. Not aggressively. Just enough to close the space between them. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you come in early and leave late," Jae-seok said. "I know you rewrite drafts yourself because you don't trust your team. I know you delete personal messages without reading them. I know you look out the window for long stretches but always pretend you were checking the weather." Dorian didn't speak. "And I know," Jae-seok added softly, "that you're still hurt by something you pretend doesn't matter." A long silence stretched between them. Dorian's jaw tensed. His eyes darted away for a second before returning to Jae-seok's. "You're crossing a line," he said. "I know," Jae-seok whispered. "So stop me." It wasn't a challenge. It was an offering. Dorian didn't move. He didn't touch him. But the distance between them was now nearly non-existent. His breath was calm, but his voice cracked slightly when he finally said, "You have no idea what you're doing." Jae-seok met his eyes and replied, "Neither do you." And with that, he turned and left, the soft click of the door somehow louder than any goodbye. The weekend passed like a storm that never broke. Jae-seok spent it pacing his apartment, half-finished ramen cooling on the counter, his phone lighting up with messages from friends he no longer had time to meet. But he didn't care about the missed outings or ignored calls. He kept replaying that moment standing in Dorian's office, the way their bodies had been inches apart, the way his voice had trembled slightly when he said, "So stop me." And Dorian hadn't. That was the part Jae-seok couldn't stop thinking about. Not the silence, but the absence of rejection. On Monday, the office had returned to its usual sharp-edged rhythm, files stacking on desks, phones buzzing, the quiet intensity of law wrapped in steel and glass. But something had shifted. Dorian didn't avoid him anymore. If anything, he was watching more closely now. At meetings, their eyes met longer. In passing, their greetings were shorter, clipped like they were afraid too many words might spill something real. And when Jae-seok entered Dorian's office, the silence between them wasn't cold anymore. It was charged. Jae-seok delivered a revised case brief just before lunch. Dorian schemed it with his usual intensity, but his hand paused at the last page. "You rewrote the closing argument," he said without looking up. "I thought it made more sense emotionally," Jae-seok replied. "The client's not just worried about her business. She's afraid of losing her legacy." Silence. "Then, you're not wrong." Jae-seok's breath caught. Dorian glanced up, eyes meeting his. But you didn't clear the change with me. I took a risk, Jae-seok said. You're getting bolder. Maybe I want you to see me clearly. There it was again, that line neither of them wanted to admit they were walking. That almost confession. That almost invitation. Dorian set the file down. Be careful with boldness, Jae-seok. It looks a lot like recklessness in this office. Is that how you see me? Jae-seok asked, voice quiet. Dorian stared at him. Then he said, I haven't decided yet. That evening, rain swept across the city. Most of the office had cleared out early, but Dorian remained at his desk, eyes scanning the glowing screen. Outside, the city lights blurred behind the glass like the world had started to smudge. Jae-seok stood at the door. Still working? He asked, stepping in. I don't really sleep much. Jae-seok leaned against the wall. I used to think people like you didn't feel anything. Dorian didn't look away from the screen. People like me. You're cold. Brilliant. Unshakable. You move through the world like it owes you nothing, and you like it that way. Dorian finally looked at him. Is that what you think? Jae-seok nodded. But lately? I'm not so sure. Dorian's gaze was unreadable. He stood slowly, walking around the desk, stopping a foot away from Jae-seok. You think I'm cold, he said, low and measured. But you don't stop pushing. Why? Jae-seok's throat felt tight. Because cold things crack when they're under too much pressure. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Dorian said, quietly, and what happens when they do? Jae-seok didn't answer. He didn't have to. The tension between them hung like the edge of a storm, too fragile to ignore, too dangerous to provoke. Dorian stepped back. You should go home. It wasn't dismissal. It was protection. Jae-seok hesitated. Then nodded. Good night, Mr. Kim. He left without looking back. Outside, the rain had softened. But Dorian remained at the window long after Jae-seok disappeared from view, his reflection staring back at him, flawed, flickering, and for the first time in a long time, uncertain. By the end of the week, something had shifted. It wasn't spoken, and it wasn't visible in anything as obvious as a smile or a touch. But it was there in the way Dorian no longer corrected Jae-seok's casual tone, or how Jae-seok no longer hesitated before stepping into Dorian's office without knocking. A new kind of rhythm had formed. But not everyone in the office missed the shift. Dorian's longtime associate, Min Ji-eun, noticed the way her boss lingered after Jae-seok left the room. She saw the briefest glance exchanged during meetings. She didn't say anything. But she watched. Late one night, Jae-seok stayed behind to finish a set of exhibits for trial prep. The rain had returned, steady and hypnotic against the windows. Most of the floor was dark, except for the soft glow spilling from Dorian's corner office. Eventually, footsteps approached. You always work this late? Dorian's voice was low but not unfriendly. Jae-seok didn't look up from his laptop. Only when I need a reason to stay. A pause. Dorian folded his arms. You don't hide it very well. Neither do you. Another pause. Then Dorian stepped closer. You're a good paralegal, he said carefully. Sharp. Disciplined. Unafraid to challenge authority. A breath. But this, whatever this is between us, it's blurring lines we're not supposed to cross. Jae-seok saved his document slowly, closed the lid of his laptop, and finally met Dorian's gaze. "You're the one who built the lines," he said softly. "You don't get to act surprised when someone steps over them." Dorian looked at him for a long moment, eyes dark, conflicted. "Do you want me to fire you?" he asked, but it wasn't a threat. It sounded almost like a plea. Jae-seok stepped forward, just slightly. "No. Because then you wouldn't have an excuse to keep seeing me every day." That hit something inside Dorian, something dangerous and soft all at once. "Careful," he murmured. "I already told you," Jae-seok said. "I don't think you really want careful." The space between them was charged again. Not physical, not yet, but emotional, thick with what neither of them dared to name. Finally, Dorian turned away first. "You should get some sleep." "You always say that," Jae-seok replied gently. "And you never listen," Dorian said without turning back. Jae-seok watched him go, heart thudding in his chest. The next morning, the balance tilted again. Dorian arrived earlier than usual. No briefcase. No tie. Just a black turtleneck and sharp blazer, like he'd stepped straight out of a different life. He passed Jae-seok without a word but left a file on his desk. Inside, trial notes, strategy revisions, and one handwritten message. "Dinner. Tonight. We need to talk. Don't be late." That evening, they sat across from each other in a quiet corner of a high-rise restaurant Dorian reserved last minute under a name that wasn't his. The view behind them shimmered with Seoul's lights, but neither man looked outside. They only looked at each other. "This isn't about the case," Jae-seok said after the waiter left. "No," Dorian replied. "It's about your brother." Jae-seok's stomach turned. He hadn't expected the conversation to begin so directly. Dorian took a breath. "He left me because I found out something about his past. Something he didn't want anyone to know. I gave him a choice, tell the truth or keep living the lie." Jae-seok froze. "What kind of lie?" "That's not my secret to share," Dorian said. "But I didn't end things." "He did." Jae-seok's fingers curled around his glass. "Why didn't you ever reach out to him?" "I did," Dorian said. "Twice. After that, I stopped trying. I wasn't going to chase someone who made it clear they didn't want to be found." Jae-seok stared down at his lap. "He said you turned cold overnight. Shut him out." Dorian leaned forward slightly. "I stopped coddling him." "That's not the same thing." Silence pulsed between them. Then Jae-seok whispered, "So which one of you lied?" Dorian didn't flinch. "Both of us." Jae-seok looked up and something in him softened. "And now?" "Now." Dorian's voice dipped low. "I see you. And it terrifies me." It was the first time he'd admitted fear out loud. The quiet between them wasn't sharp anymore. It was intimate. Jae-seok smiled faintly. "I'm not your second chance." "I know," Dorian replied. "You're my last." Dorian hadn't planned to let things go this far. He'd told himself from the beginning, keep it professional. Keep him at a distance. But somewhere between late-night case reviews and Jae-seok's disarming honesty, the walls had started to buckle. Now, every time he looked at him, he didn't just see the younger brother of his ex. He saw a threat. Not to his firm. To his control. The next few days blurred. They worked together in closer proximity than ever, preparing for a major hearing. Long hours in the same room. Shared silence. Brushed shoulders. Jae-suk's fingertips sometimes tapping just a little too close to Dorian's hand on the table. Everything they didn't say had weight. And everything they did say felt like a test. On Thursday night, the firm's partners held a networking mixer, a room full of polished lawyers, strategic conversations, and barely hidden egos. Jae-suk hadn't planned to go, but Dorian told him to show up. "You're on my team. That means you're visible now," he said, his tone cool but loaded. Jae-suk arrived in a fitted black shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to show the vein on his forearm. His presence didn't go unnoticed. Especially by Dorian. Across the room, their eyes met and held. But neither approached. Not until Ji-eun, Dorian's longtime colleague, leaned in beside him and murmured something that made Dorian glance sharply across the floor, toward Jae-suk, who was talking laughing with a junior associate. Jealousy, unexpected and raw, curled low in Dorian's chest. He crossed the room. "Enjoying yourself?" he asked Jae-suk coolly. Jae-suk tilted his head. "Trying to. You sent me here, remember?" Dorian's voice dipped lower. "That wasn't an invitation to flirt with half the staff." Jae-suk raised a brow. "And if I was?" The moment tightened between them. Dorian didn't respond. He just turned slightly and said, "Walk with me." They ended up outside, on the quiet rooftop terrace above the city. The air was cool, distant sounds of traffic hummed below. Jae-suk leaned against the railing. "If this is about boundaries again, I think we're past that point." Dorian looked at him, really looked at him. "You don't understand what this could cost me. I'm not asking you to risk your career." "No," Dorian said, stepping closer, "you're asking me to feel something I've spent years avoiding." Jae-suk's voice softened. "So you'd rather bury it?" Dorian exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to do this and still keep control." Jae-suk's gaze didn't waver. "Then maybe stop trying to control me." That struck something deep. Dorian moved even closer, his voice low, rough with something unspoken. "You really think I want to give in to this?" "No," Jae-suk whispered. "I think you already have." The silence between them broke open. No kiss, no touch, but it was louder than either. A raw, almost unbearable closeness crackled between them. But Dorian stepped back. Not because he didn't want it. Because wanting it meant losing the one thing he still thought he had, control. Later that night, Jae-suk lay in bed, staring at his ceiling. The look in Dorian's eyes, conflicted, longing, terrified, had burned into him. He reached for his phone. Opened a text. Hesitated. Then typed, "You don't have to be perfect. Just be real." He didn't send it. He just let it sit there on the screen, unsent, unread, but still true. For 2 days, they didn't speak outside of work. Not in the hallways. Not over coffee. Not even in passing glances. Everything between Dorian and Jae-suk had reverted to what it was supposed to be: formal, quiet, sharp. But the air between them had changed. It wasn't distance. It was pressure. A silent countdown. And everyone around them could feel it. On Wednesday, they met in Dorian's office to finalize exhibits for a high-stakes litigation. Jae-suk arrived 5 minutes early, Dorian 5 minutes late. Neither commented. The only sound was the shuffling of paper and the occasional click of a pen. Then Jae-suk said, without looking up, "I'm not here to break you." Dorian froze. Jae-suk continued, voice calm. "But I think you're scared I might." Silence stretched like glass. Dorian's reply was measured. "I don't get scared." Jae-seok looked up. "You do. You're just good at hiding it." There it was again, Jae-seok's quiet way of touching the sore spot without pushing too hard. Dorian hated how accurate he was. Or maybe he didn't hate it? Maybe he needed it? Later that night, the silence followed Dorian home like a shadow. He stood in his apartment, half-drunk, glass of wine on the table, suit jacket still on. His phone buzzed. Unknown contact. Is it easier to pretend it means nothing? He didn't have to ask who it was. But instead of replying, Dorian stared at the message. His fingers hovered. His mind raced. Instead, he opened his email and buried himself in red lines. The next day, Jae-seok was called into Gen's office. "You've caught his attention," she said bluntly. He kept his face neutral. "I just do my job." Gen smiled, cold and sharp. "You're not the first paralegal to think they're special." But Dorian doesn't keep people close for long. Jae-seok didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to stay close." "Good," she replied. "Because this firm doesn't do messy." As he left her office, he realized something odd. He didn't feel threatened. He felt challenged. That evening, Jae-seok found himself standing outside Dorian's building. He wasn't sure why he'd come. He could be he walked away. He should have. But he didn't. He texted. "I'm outside. I'll leave if you want." The reply came almost instantly. "Come up." Dorian's apartment was clean, almost sterile. Expensive books. A single untouched armchair by the window. It looked like a place someone lived in without ever settling down. They stood in the entryway, saying nothing. Then Dorian spoke. "I don't invite people here." Jae-seok met his gaze. "Then why me?" Dorian looked tired. "Because I wanted to know if I could trust you." Jae-seok stepped forward. "And I still don't know." They were close now. Jae-seok's voice dropped. "Then let me prove it." For one moment, Dorian didn't move. Then slowly he reached up and touched the side of Jae-seok's face. It wasn't a kiss. Not yet. But it was intimate. Reverent. Like Dorian was memorizing something he didn't believe he deserved to keep. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "Good," Jae-seok whispered. "Then maybe we'll figure it out together." For a little while, things felt still. Not peaceful, never that, but settled in their chaos. Dorian and Jae-seok didn't speak of what almost happened in the apartment. No kiss, no confession, just a lingering touch and a silence that said more than either of them dared to voice. But something had shifted. Their movements around each other became more natural. The proximity didn't sting anymore, it pulsed. Like something alive beneath their skin. Dorian didn't tell Jae-seok not to come to his office unannounced anymore. And Jae-seok didn't stop. Then, just as the stillness settled, everything cracked. It started with an email. An anonymous tip, forwarded to Dorian's inbox with the subject line, "You should know who you're working with." Inside was an attachment. Photos. Documents. A scanned page from a sealed juvenile court record. And at the center of it all, Jae-seok. That night, Dorian didn't go home. He stayed in the office long after everyone else had left, staring at the file, his jaw tense. The details were vague, intentionally buried. A sealed case. A record suppressed by the court. But the implication was clear enough. Jae-seok had been involved in something serious. Something his older brother never spoke of. Something Jae-seok never mentioned. And Dorian, despite everything, had never asked. He didn't sleep. The next morning, Jae-seok walked into the office with 2 coffees. Dorian didn't look at him, not once. By noon, Jae-seok noticed the shift. He stood by the doorway, watching Dorian review a brief like it was the only thing in the world. "You're doing that thing again," Jae-seok said softly. "The freezing me out thing." Dorian didn't respond. Jae-seok stepped in. "What happened?" Dorian finally looked up. "You tell me." The weight in his voice made Jae-seok pause. Then he saw it on the edge of the desk. The open file. His stomach dropped. He stepped forward and picked it up. "You read it," Jae-seok said quietly. Dorian didn't blink. "You lied to me." "No," Jae-seok said, voice steady. "I just didn't tell you everything." "Same thing." "No," he repeated, louder now. "It's not." They stared at each other, both unflinching, both wounded. Then Jae-seok set the file down. "Do you want the truth now?" Dorian didn't answer. So Jae-seok gave it anyway. "When I was 16, he began, my brother took the fall for something I did." Dorian's eyes narrowed. "I wasn't the golden child," Jae-seok said. "Not like people thought. I was angry. Messy. I got into fights. I ran with the wrong people. One night, things went too far. There was a break-in. A fight. One of the boys I was with had a knife." He paused. Dorian didn't speak. "I didn't hurt anyone," Jae-seok said. "But I didn't stop it either. My brother came to get me when he found out. He told the police he was there. Took the charges. Juvenile record, sealed. He thought he was protecting me. You let him." "I begged him not to," Jae-seok said. "But he wouldn't listen. Said he already ruined too many things. Said this was one thing he could fix." Dorian looked away. Jae-seok stepped closer. "He was never the villain in your story. And I wasn't the victim." "And now?" Dorian asked, his voice raw. Jae-seok's words came like an open wound. "Now I live with it. Every day." For the first time, Dorian didn't see a mystery in front of him. He saw a boy who had been drowning and the man who clawed his way to the surface. It should have made things clearer. But all it did was blur the line further. Between loyalty and guilt. Between trust and desire. Between what was safe, and what was real. That night, Dorian sat alone in his car outside Jae-seok's apartment. Engine off. Street lights flickering. He didn't knock. He didn't text. He just sat there, wishing he could let go of control long enough to fall. The next day, Dorian didn't come into the office. No explanation. No text. Just silence. Jae-seok didn't ask where he was. But part of him already knew. Dorian was pulling back again, retreating behind silence and logic, afraid that if he let himself feel, everything would break. And still, Jae-seok waited. By nightfall, Jae-seok was in the office alone. The lights were low, the city flickering outside the windows like a silent witness. The case files were spread across the desk, untouched. He checked his phone. No new messages. He closed his eyes. Then the elevator chimed. Footsteps. Slow, familiar. Jae-seok didn't turn around. He just said, "I thought you weren't coming back." Dorian's voice was quiet behind him. "I almost didn't." Jae-seok turned. Dorian stood there, no tie, shirt sleeves rolled, the weariness in his eyes softening into something more human. He stepped into the room slowly. "I spent the last 24 hours trying to convince myself that walking away from this was the smart thing to do," Dorian said. And Jae-seok asked. "I've never been good at losing control," Dorian admitted. "And you make me forget I ever had it." Jae-seok's breath caught. "But I realized," Dorian continued, "maybe I don't need to be in control. Not with you." Jae-seok stepped forward, eyes never leaving his. "Then don't hold back." Dorian didn't. He crossed the space between them, and for the first time finally he kissed him. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It was all tension and release, trembling restraint and quiet ache. It was months of silence crashing down into one breathless moment. When they pulled apart, Dorian's forehead rested lightly against Jae-seok's. "I'm scared," he whispered. "I know," Jae-seok murmured. "Me too. But I don't want to keep pretending I don't want this." Jae-seok smiled softly. "Then stop pretending." They didn't undress each other. There were no torn clothes or gasping confessions. Instead, they sat on the worn leather couch in the corner of the office, Dorian's hand curled over Jae-seok's, quiet and solid. The city lights stretched out before them, unblinking. "You still think I'm dangerous?" Jae-seok asked. Dorian looked at him, tired and open. "Only because you see me too clearly." "Then let me stay," Jae-seok said. "No more games. No more lies." Dorian didn't answer with words. He just leaned in and kissed him again, softer this time, slow and certain. Like choosing to fall. And for the first time in years, Dorian let himself be chosen. 2 weeks later, everything had changed and nothing had. They still worked in the same office. Still passed each other case files, exchanged pointed remarks, argued over strategy. But under all of that, something deeper had settled in ease. Jae-seok didn't flinch when Dorian got cold or clipped with his words. He knew the man behind the walls now. And Dorian he no longer pushed Jae-seok away. He still struggled, still second-guessed, but when Jae-seok reached for his hand under the table, Dorian didn't pull back. He held on. One evening, they found themselves walking home together after drinks with colleagues. The city buzzed quietly around them, warm lights in the distance, spring wind brushing against their coats. "I think Ji-eun suspects something," Jae-seok said with a smirk. "She's too smart not to," Dorian replied. "But she also knows better than to ask." Jae-seok chuckled. "And what would you say if she did?" Dorian's answer was slow. Thoughtful. "I'd tell her the truth." Jae-seok raised a brow. "Which truth?" "That I hired someone dangerous," Dorian said. "Who ruined all my routines. Who made me feel things I didn't want to feel. And I'm not letting him go." Jae-seok paused on the sidewalk. His smile faded not out of sadness, but because something in him cracked open. Something he had held tight for years. Dorian saw it, and for once, he didn't retreat. "You don't have to keep proving yourself to me," Dorian said gently. "You never did." Jae-seok's voice came low, steady. "You were the only one I wanted to prove anything to." Later, in Dorian's apartment, they sat on the floor backs to the couch, glasses half full. Dorian turned to him. "What happens now?" Jae-seok tilted his head. Professionally? No. Personally? There was a long silence. Then Jae-seok answered, now we stop lying. To each other. And to ourselves. Dorian let that sit between them. Then, quietly, he asked, and if we mess it up? Jae-seok reached over and laced their fingers together. Then we mess it up together. Epilogue, 6 months later. Jae-seok stood in the office pantry, staring at the bulletin board where new hires were posted. Beside him, Dorian appeared with his usual cup of black coffee. You're not hazing the new paralegal, are you? He asked dryly. Jae-seok grinned. Only gently. You're terrible. I learned from the best. Dorian leaned in, kissed his cheek quickly and walked off like nothing had happened. Behind them, 2 associates stared in stunned silence. Jae-seok didn't even blink. He just smiled to himself and went back to his coffee. Because some truths were better when they stopped being secrets.